Hey everybody, this is Dark Guardsman, and we're back with another video. Now, yes, we are continuing with the visualization software. I know a few people have been getting a little tired of the hype of me working on the math. I want to see it in the game. That will happen soon. So we'll end up actually taking the equations. As the wonderful thing that just happened yesterday is with the help of Grogger, who usually does our assets. He toyed around for multiple hours yesterday. Me and him went back and forth talking about the equations. Of course, we were talking with a few other developers and stuff, and we finally figured it out. We figured out how to make the equations work the way we want them. So we figured out not only how to get the equation to go from point A to point B, so that was what we currently had before we even started, is that you had a start point, end point, and as long as you put those two in there, the missile would go from A to B without any problem. The part we were trying to figure out was how to get max height working the way we expected it. So now we've achieved that. You can actually sit here and look at the last calculations I ran because the display didn't update itself. I still got to work on the application and get it doing a little bit better improvement. But it actually will hit the max height, so we can feed it in, and whatever max height we feed into it, it will work. And it's pretty wonderful. Let me go ahead and show the equation, if we can scroll down. So I still haven't fully understood how this equation works that he made, and he doesn't understand how it works either, because basically how we got to this was just screwing around until it worked. We removed all magic numbers. We do actually still have some numbers here, but they're no longer magical based. These are actually calculatable values that are dependent, and they end up more or less turning into numbers we already had. So TD ends up turning into basically our ticks per distance is what this value turns into. So the same value we use up here, this is what this ends up turning into. The reason we have it as a separate value is we can later then come in here and modify this and it would work just fine. We have hit time, which is basically, or I think it's actually height time is what this stands for. I've got to definitely redocument these and rewrite them. But effectively this is max height divided by flight time. So basically we're figuring out how much time we want to get up to the top of the distance of the curve. And we've got max height divided by flat distance. So there's a lot of values here that end up actually going into play. And these end up being multiplied by a few things. Now the equation is not perfect. That's the reason why you see a minus here. Is when he finally handed me this equation, I noticed there was a percentile error in it. And we got the percentile error down to a negligible amount, to the point where it doesn't matter anymore by just simply putting that in there. But it still is there. So if you fire a missile under 5 meters, it will actually have a noticeable precision problem of almost an entire block on the height. However, anything over 5 meters, it's negligible by 1 meter. So it's the further you go, the less noticeable it even is. So that was determined. We went through and tested tons of values for that. We also tested that if you change the height scale, the height init, the ticks per time, if you change any of these values, the equation will still work perfectly fine. You'll still go from point A to point B and the height will change. So that means, amazingly, we now can have a minimum height and we can now have a maximum height. So those will be in the configs on both the 1.7 version and 1.12 version eventually. So these can be set now. Previously, how we were controlling the minimum height is we were controlling the flight time. So you couldn't have a missile that would ever fly less than 100 ticks. Now what I've got it set to a minimum height. And the reason why that was there previously is that anything under 50 meters for the equations would completely, utterly break down. That has been fixed. We have now got it down to anything under 5 meters breaks down, and to be honest, you cannot target under 5 meters with the launchers to start with, so this is not an issue whatsoever. But getting onto the software itself, so the software has actually seen some pretty noticeable improvements. We can now mess with all the path constants, and we can now change this size of the screen. As I was noticing in the previous videos, the GUI scaled the drawing of the parabola with the size of the GUI and everything. So no matter what we put in there, we pretty much got the same parabola every single time, and it wasn't very useful. Now what I can do is I can say, okay, I want my screen to be 2000Y, 2000X, so that way when I calculate a 10 meter destination, I actually can see down here that's 10 meters. And of course I can change this and then calculate again, and we can actually see this, and it's very, very useful now because I can actually see how the equations are playing with each other. And what's even cooler about this, if I clear the display and try this again, is we can calculate this and I go, okay, what does a 20 meter look like? And I can put this in here and calculate again, and I can see this in real time, and I can see how they look in relation to each other, and of course I can scale the GUI and everything else. And then of course we can look over here and we can see that this is 200Y, and this is where you see the precision error, is that we have a very small precision error from the max height. But because it's underneath the max height, I'm going to call it acceptable. Previous equation that Grogger had handed to me was over the max height by like a precision error, so this is perfectly fine. But we can sit here and play with this for like days, and we can see exactly what this looks like. And of course I'm going to go ahead and scale out to 2000Y so we can actually see what's going on, and that apparently distorted the math a little too much. But we can go here and, oh wait, I hit clear display. This is what happens when I'm sleep deprived and clicking buttons and making a video. So let's go ahead and calculate this again. So there's our 200, but let's go ahead and put a 400 in here. So we can now see what a 400 looks like. I can then see what a 500 looks like, 600 looks like, and I can compare these next to each other inside the display and update this all the time. And you're starting to see where the max Y is coming into place. Now this is cutting this off at max Y, and we can sit here and confirm all day long that these are actually behaving as expected. So no matter what we do, these actually all hit the same value. This is where we also can put in the height scale. We can now put in height scale. Say we have a height scale of 4. What this does is this takes in our normal height, or takes in the distance. So effectively what this says that with the scale is that for every meter we travel on the X, we want to travel 4 meters up. And basically your rise over run for those who remember, I believe trigonometry or whatever it is. But if we calculate this, you'll see the path is exactly the same. So the scale does cut off limit-wise, so we know it works. So we know our max limits actually do work. We can change the init height. We can set this to 0 and hit calculate again, and we can see that, yeah, it passed over the same exact spot. Of course, if we set this to a different value, so we can start doing like 100, we can see that 100 works. And then if we change the scale to like a 2 and calculate again, we can see that, look, complete modification between those values. So this is actually really useful software now. We set it to 3, hit calculate again, I can see that. I can set it to 5 because we already did 4. We can actually sit here and watch how all these values play with each other and see them in the GUI and understand perfectly how this math works. And a really beautiful tool, to be honest, from my point of view. Most of you probably won't exactly fully comprehend why I consider this beautiful, and it really is because when you're working inside Minecraft, you can't see this data clearly. This is stuff that's really hard to see, and for those who still don't know it yet, I'm basically a computer scientist, is what I actually do for a living. At least that's what I hope to do for a living at some point. I'm getting my degree actually in May, so I haven't exactly got a job doing that, but part of being a computer scientist is you work with a lot of algorithm software and data in particular. So seeing data and being able to visualize data is really cool for somebody like me, because it lets you see in real time what is going on. It lets you actually see what the data looks like and everything, rather than staring at the information in a raw context. So if you actually go down to the debug menu, this would be a raw context. And if you were looking at this, this is useless. This is almost as useless as looking at the entity moving through the world itself. Yes, us as humans can look at an entity move and we can extrapolate in our heads what's going on. Like if you see a missile arc through the air, you know it's arcing, but it doesn't tell you a huge amount. It doesn't tell you, okay, how fast is a missile going? Okay, what's the exact position of the missile? How quick is it falling and everything else? That's what the beauty of this missile display actually is and why we're working on it. And thanks to spending all this time now, we know exactly how the math works, down to the letter, with the exception of the fact of why this equation actually does end up with the results we wanted to get. But because all this work, what will end up happening in the configs when I eventually implement this later today is that we'll have a minimum height, a maximum height, we'll have a ticks per meter flat, so you can modify how long it takes the missile to travel. You'll also be able to modify other variables, so I'll put a whole bunch of configs in here and let you play with them. And the cool thing is, this calculator will match your configs too. So if you want to mess with your configs and you're like, okay, I don't know what my minimum maximum heights are going to be. Let's say I want to toy with and make sure that all my missile paths go at least 400 in here. Let's clear this off real quick. So I'm going to see, okay, how does that behave? How does that affect my 10 meter missile? What that does with my 10 meter missile, one, it's going to cause that to go to Y400, but what I can clearly tell is that my flight time is still going to be 20 ticks. That's perfectly fine. But like, how does it behave maybe with the 100 missile? Okay, cool. Well, I still go in 200 ticks, so that's perfectly fine, so the player won't notice any real difference. It is definitely not going to affect my Y value, so that's cool. And we can sit here and we can continue playing with that, and we can modify all of our values and look at them and toy with them and get to where we're going with our data, and actually get everything else, so you can mess with all that stuff. So this tool will end up being eventually distributed for you guys to use, and it can be used to verify visually what your mod pack settings are actually going to do to the missile, so that way you don't just have to fire the missile in game and then guess if it did what you wanted to do, because some of these missiles are going to travel quite fast. If you look at the motion over here, this will be moving pretty much almost 12 meters a second, or 12 meters a tick. By the way, for those people that are worried about this is going to glitch their wall, the missiles are actually programmed with ray traces in their nose, so they actually will ray trace before they actually move, so that way if they end up moving through a wall, they'll just explode on the wall they contact with. So you guys don't have to worry too much about that. That's been solved already. But anyways, that's all I got for you, a quick update. I'll come back with another video showing this math actually working in-game here, and talking about different other things that we end up working on. It's very likely I'm going to be building a lot more of this visualization software, because this was a really cool experience. I haven't had to do visualization software since I was in my first and second year of college, when I was building like asteroid visualizers and different physics simulations with this kind of stuff. So what we'll end up probably doing is I want to build a graph to track power usage at some point, and then what we'll end up tying that into is maybe a GUI of some kind that lets you go, okay, I have like 10 RF generators that produce this amount of power that consume this amount of items, and what you could do is similar to what you do in Factorio, is track the number of items consumed to the power being generated to the power being used to figure out how many items you need to keep on hand to power those machines at all times, or to check to see if your system is stable. For example, if you built a system that made lava and then consumed lava, you can then verify that your consumption and production rate match each other in enough of a regard that you won't run out of power, won't run out of resources. But we'll come back with that another day, because that's something I probably won't touch on right away, but it will happen eventually, which eventually for me could be anywhere from the next month or next year. Right now, I do know as soon as we do finish ICBM Classic, we're going to work on atomic science, so we may end up making one of these for atomic science's reactors. But I'll get back to you on that.